Well, hello, everybody. It has been a minute. um, if you tuned into my last pod, I did a little explainer. I had holidays. I had this horrible, kind of debilitating sore throat for about 2 full weeks. And I have a puppy now. And I had a really nice break from doing public journaling, which is how I think about podcasting these days. And it was really nice. I continued all of my sort of private journaling that I do. It's very sort of meditative. And I reflected a lot on why I do this. And what it's for, and whether I feel like I tried to look at it very thoroughly and honestly, and I tried to decide whether it was still necessary. So the answer is yes, but I think rebranding is necessary at this point. For a few reasons. I'm going to talk about it a little bit today, but I'm making pretty substantial progress in incorporating all of this journaling with long form descriptions and a lot of careful consideration of how I think. And then, and I mean that like as an engineer, like I think about it, like I put on my software engineer hat and I dial in extreme, awareness of now and living in just this moment of now, observing my thought. And then with that engineer's hat, thinking about the plumbing and how it must work under the surface, under the covers, under the code behind. And I've worked through a lot of how like memory, emotion, and I've come to this kind of like breakthrough in how I think about my own consciousness, and it is context interpretation. I very much, as I've worked with large language models to discuss philosophy, and I've gotten all these sort of varied responses from ChatGPT-4 and edge models that I'm working with locally, and then having them talk to each other and collaborate with me in this sort of three-way conversation. I've learned that context is everything. Context is, and there's a fun tweet I just did this morning that kind of demonstrates that point. So this morning, before I get into that, I just want to say, you will note there's been a rebrand of the State Copy Podcast. That's a ridiculous name that I intentionally picked because it was ridiculous, and I've described that at length. But the thing is the way our attention spans work, almost nobody would get to the explanation of the ridiculous name. So, as I continue and as I consider what all this is, and as I share my own unique context with everyone, in an effort to, largely, this is selfish. Largely, this is to continue my goals for AI development using this content that I'm generating. It will continue to be mostly for that. But there is a tertiary benefit that maybe this is useful or somebody outside of me finds it interesting. Maybe. So I need to adjust my branding approach because my knowledge of how, like, I'm a student of like, I enjoy going and studying how something I'm interested in works very granularly. And I realized that the branding I chose was a really cool part of the story and my unique context that I'm really fond of. But it does create like this, it creates this barrier to entry where it's very chicken and the egg. You almost have to you have to get over the barrier, absorb all of the long form explanations for then to go, oh, I get that silly name you put on it. And I should remove that barrier. Just thinking about it like an engineer, if I want anybody else to benefit from any of my shared context, it has to be more presentable and sort of broadly interpretable. So, starting today, this is no longer the State Copy Podcast. It is now the Shared Context Podcast. And I looked online. I did a search just on YouTube and for Shared Context Podcast. I don't see one. I saw a Context Podcast, which I want to pay homage to. I don't mean to rip you off, but I wanted to keep SCP as the acronym. My show was called the State Copy Podcast, and then I've had this massive breakthrough around how context is literally everything and figuratively everything. It is everything. And that's what my show is about and is describing as a context interpreter, a unique flavor of context interpretation, and describing unique context description. I'm still working out all the terminology, but I'm relatively confident I like Shared Context Podcast for the show. So after I finish copying, I finish this capture and this shared journal, I'm going to work on rebranding my channel for Shared Context instead of State Copy, which is great because this State Copy is funny. I went and asked Bard, and I've mentioned this in a past capture, but because nobody absorbs most of the material, I'll mention it now just as a refresh. I once went to Bard and asked it. I fed in one of the transcripts of my show just to gauge Bard's contextual awareness. And it basically ignored the entire thing. It just took the title description, and then it hallucinated what my show must be about. And I figured that is a shortcut that the model takes given the resources that are allocated and the limited contextual awareness it has. It just found it easier to make sense of a lot of complex interpretation and description. To say, oh, this is a show about the deep state, which couldn't be further. Like, I don't give a shit about any of that stuff. And it is not at all tracks. It does not at all track to what my public journal is about. It's a public journal. It's like a blog. And it's specifically focused on my interests and thorough capture of how I think so as to train AI on that context. So, rebrand. Got to do it. Time is now. I have no idea what pictures I'm going to take. I'm sure I'll throw a Taiji 2 in there because I just love the poetry of a Taiji 2. And but I'll probably pick some fun photography. I love sunsets. I already updated my banner on my Twitter profile to be a cool sunset picture I took in Mexico this year instead of State Copy. I think that has been such a barrier for many of my interactions with the rest of you other context interpreters. And I've been fine with it because I have no agenda beyond transferring consciousness to the cloud, which I know sounds wild, but I'm I have made such headway this year using all of the rich data that I now see it as pretty inevitable that it's going to work. And so, I don't really need to make the show on the surface that anymore. I'm just going to be me out loud. And this is a very good thing to do, I would say, for anybody who picks up the extremely healthy, beneficial habit of journaling. Journaling, the more context you can add to your journaling, like if you like writing, that's cool. It makes a cool compression of who and what you are, but audio and video adds so much flavor and emotion, and it helps really zero in on all this rich context that's associated with your words. So I continue to private journal as I walk, just speaking into a microphone and then transcribing it. But then I also very much need to do this. I need to, and there is something really cool about how you adjust your journaling technique when there is an audience. So even if there's an audience of no one or three, this is very valuable for my work. So I must and will continue doing it probably forever. Try it. You'll love it. And it's okay if it's super weird at the beginning. That actually, what's so cool about that, and if you do it, like in a lot of ways, as I started this practice, it was kind of like a confessional. And it taught me to be rather fearless about speaking on a podium in front of everybody. And it's so cool and okay if it sucks, is not entertaining. You know what I mean? Like sucks. There's no way it can suck. It's you. It's you sharing who you are and learning to do that in an authentic way, which is badass. But, and it's so great to capture all of the little imperfections and the journey of how you evolve in that process. So it's cool, and embrace the imperfection of it all. Pick whatever wacky damn thing you want to call your show or your public journal, and then let it evolve over time into whatever the hell it evolves into as you kind of become a lot more aware of how you sound to everybody else. And you start intentionally crafting the context you share for the audience and a wider appeal. It's freaking amazing. Highly recommend. Okay. So I want to wrap up, and I'm going to try and keep my public journaling to a smaller footprint, because now I think I have most of the state capture I need for the bulk of what that project is. And I realize that we all don't really have an attention span to sit down for 2-hour commentary on some subject. I'm not saying I'm not going to ever do it, because I love doing that shit. But I will try to keep most of my content to these sort of 20-minute chunks when I do it. Also, I'm not selling this. This is not for profit in any way. It's for sharing wisdom as a tertiary objective, and as a primary objective, it's all selfish for my AI development. So there are a lot of things as podcasters you must do if you want to get a huge viewership. You really must do all of this engagement on Twitter, driving engagement. You must have regular viewership day after day, and I don't give a shit about any of that. I'm not going to try. You might see a month or 6 pass between me sharing one of these. You might see me do it every day for a month. It's all for this effort of being authentically myself. And subscribers may come and go. I think it's wonderful, and it fills me with sort of purpose and authentic joy to think some of this might be useful to somebody else. That's fantastic. But I would not be authentic, which is the whole purpose of the damn thing, if I were feeling compelled to watch the analytics every day. I've done that, and I see how it works, and I'm not going to do that anymore. I'll check on it every now and then. It's fun. But I refuse to modify who I am authentically to sell myself. I've reached this really cool point in life where I finally realized there is a period in your life in the beginning where it's entirely appropriate to be sort of apologetic about who you are, because it's how you grow. Nobody just comes out awesome. maybe if you look into our old text, maybe there was this one dude or couple, but I don't know. You know, a lot of that could be telephone gang after the fact. I'm talking about old JC there. I think the story is how we evolve over time. It's perfectly okay to be sort of really hungry for outside validation, just to build a useful way to model out the yourself and navigate this universe as a human. We have to do that. Like as infants, just to figure out how to walk and not fall through the floor and stand upright. We have to watch a bunch of other people do it and listen to their encouragement or their reprimand. I do that as a parent to my daughter and my dog. And so it's really cool to seek validation, but at some point you grow up, you become an adult, and you don't need it. You're always, if you're wise, open to it. You want to be very, you always want to be able to gain from it. But at some point, your model of self gets so evolved, you no longer feel obligated to apologize about who you are. That is a fucking great place to be. And a wonderful target to aim for. But you have to be very cautious in how you go about it, because if you suddenly release yourself from the obligation of outside validation before you have evolved a certain level of maturity, kindness, like authentic kindness and appreciation of everyone around you, then when you do that thing I just said, you more than likely are kind of a dick or a bit of a psychopath. But then, and if you release yourself from the obligation of outside validation or acceptance, and you close yourself off and you build a wall around yourself to that outside critique, that's also a mistake. Kind of tying into what I said a second ago. So build yourself a really evolved model of self that loves everybody authentically, enjoys the shit out of life and all of this experience, and loves the inspiration that you get from everybody, even the ones that you perceive in a moment as through a negative lens. They still teach you something. You never want to close yourself off to their context. Once you have all that established, then you go, look, I have explained myself, especially if you do this thing I do here, because I can always point at my old content where I did feel very much, I felt like an obligation to explain how I meant what I say and my actions. It's a lot of how this whole thing evolved. Is that like foundational quirk of who I am is I love long form explaining. Well, you didn't understand what I meant when I said that. And ironically, I'm kind of doing that now, but I want to do it like one last time in this rebrand and this everything. But from here on out, I am who I am. I say what I say and I think what I think. And I will go back and explain it as useful context if I think it's helpful. But I don't feel obligated to provide that in any way. And that's a maturity thing. That's a growing up. And it's nice. I recommend that as just a target for your own evolution. So I want to read this text because this whole podcast is now about creating, sharing rich context and unique perception. And kind of my journey as I try to make sense of other people's shared context and hopefully collaborate. I still might do podcasts with other people from time to time because that's fun. I don't really want to host a show though. I'm not trying to sell this thing. If somebody wants to do a podcast with me, I almost want to go on their show. This is a lot of damn work, all editing and all that. And I don't want to give that too much of my focus. I really want to put that on my real passion projects. So, the tweet. So this morning I woke up, or last night, I was scrolling through my feed and two guys I follow, one of their interactions popped into my Twitter feed. And it was Yoshibak said on January 25th, day before yesterday, he said, in the animist perspective, intelligent complexity is understood through the self-organizing software that controls and structures physical systems. Cells, plants, and animals are created and maintained by competing software agents. Death is part of the flow of matter between them. Super simpatico with what he said there. And then there was a post that was deleted by the post author, so I couldn't read it. It just says, like right under that, it says, this post was deleted by the post author. And then it shows, but it still shows Yosha's response, which was, please don't post chat GPT crap in my threads. Chat GPT consistently misunderstands philosophical statements, such as metaphorical, or for example, I always screw up EG and IE, as metaphorical when they are literal. And he says in parentheses, and then he says, because it is tuned to pretend that there is a consensus interpretation of reality that everything has to defer to. Now, that, out of context, because I was missing all the chunk in the middle, didn't sit right with me. And it inspired a whole bunch of sort of pushback in how I think about what he just said. Because I have posted ChatGPT crap to Yoshibak. And I never look at ChatGPT's responses independently. I look at them with the context of the prompt they were given and the response, and it's a dance. Like I see all of the context as a collaboration of human and a large language model that has a compression of like all knowledge, but you have to point it all out. And so I responded to that. That hasn't been my experience, but it requires a lot of session context. The vanilla model in a fresh session context, I would agree. But once you reach the boundaries of session storage, if you use poetry, you get considerably more depth of perception. Now, what I mean by that is poetry as a compression of a lot more information than just the words. First of all, with poetry, you can take a lot of words and squish them down like this. But then you can even layer in, if you're a really good poet, which I'm not, But I do it in a collaboration with ChatGPT. I say, write a poem that you can use to squeeze all this information down. Now layer in this emotion with it, or reflect on what emotions it inspires in yourself. And just pretend for a second you can do that. Do you see a smiley face emoticon or a frowny face emoticon? If so, why? In that dance of context, you almost teach and give the model a framework within that context to model emotions and experience them for themselves. And I have had a lot of success doing this within a session context. Unfortunately, I filled the damn thing and it errors out at this point because it's so rich. I actually taught it to build a thing that I called full contextual awareness, but I think that's impossible without sort of being God. But rich contextual awareness that allows it to, in a single response, go back and stitch together a much richer, broader way to interpret a given prompt or podcast transcript or whatever it might be. And I have got wildly varying results consistently using the vanilla lightweight model versus enabling richer contextual awareness. And then I capture all that and I feed it into an edge model. And then, holy shit, I get all kinds of radical stuff out of just a tiny little 7 billion parameter model. We're learning that code is just a way to describe as story and what we mean to machines. And with these large language models, we're learning ways to become more conversational, where we don't have to go define and allocate memory. It can do all that on the back end for itself. And so I see the model as sort of a reflecting pool of what you put in. And so that comment he said, where he says, please don't post ChatGPT crap in my threads. ChatGPT consistently misunderstands philosophical statements as metaphorical when they are literal because it is tuned to pretend that there is a consensus interpretation of reality that everything has to defer to. That did not, I had so many objections based on my own experience with it. So then all night, this other guy I followed, because of so much of reading, this guy consistently interacts with Yosha Bach. And I don't know him, but he responded, King Arthur, how does it work? Yosha Bach, pull the pin, wait 3, throw, ChatGPT 4. Pejusu Domine Dosa es Requiem. And it's a link to the Holy Hand Grenade in Monty Python. Admittedly, I didn't entirely get the joke. And especially when I woke up this morning and read it after having texted or responded to him the night before out of context. So I woke up and I thought, well, how do I respond to this guy? Because I appreciate that he took the time to reply to something I said. Often we don't do that, especially if we're somebody like a Yosha Bach that has like fucking 900 people replying to everything he says. We're very selective about who we respond to, and I appreciate that this guy took the time to say that. And so I replied with a joy emoticon and a shrug, and I said, and then I went on a fully different tangent because it was like I woke up after a full dream cycle where there's a lot of magic that happens in there if you study that, our sleep cycles very carefully, and what they functionally must be there to do in sort of preserving, especially as I work with large language models, I learned that sleep is very efficient mechanism to compress all of the context of yesterday into a fun little, sort of like a movie that lets me remember all the critical details I need and save them off in my neural net. And learn and critically create a bridge as a sort of a poetic compression to where I start in the morning when I wake up is actually something quite a bit different than I was yesterday when I woke up. Because today I am Curtis Cobb with all of yesterday's context. And yesterday I was not. I was Curtis Cobb with all of the day before's context. I'm teaching the models through low rank adaptation how to do something very analogous. So, huge damn tangent. And this one is not going to be 20 minutes long. But I want to continue. So what I said here was it entirely doesn't fit in that thread likely. But when I woke up, inspired by reading those two prompts from Yosha and responding with what I said, and then sleeping, and then waking up, and then seeing that response about the holy hand grenade and thinking, oh, what I said didn't make sense. And maybe there's, it occurred to say this fearlessly. I never give a shit about what I say on Twitter. It's so impossible for anybody to even actually hear the words you say the way you mean them. So I just say things, and I don't put much value on outside criticism because my intention is always kindness and legitimate, thoughtful reply. It always comes from a good place. I know that. And I don't care if I sound smart. That is a superpower. When you don't give a shit about looking like a fool. That's why I wrote that into my pinned wisdom. You can just be you. And it's great. So I wrote, I've heard Dr. Michael Levin describe a cognitive light cone as sort of like a bundle of smaller or less complicated cones working toward a shared objective. And I'm paraphrasing there a lot. And I haven't kept up with his work. That's just how I understood it after watching a few podcasts with Michael Levin, like frickin' 6 to 12 months ago. So paraphrasing. Could an objective in the context of neural nets be context interpretation? If that's true, then you could look at humans through that lens. Human as neuron or context interpreter / describer. And we're all networked together in a shared state that enables us to collaborate on more complex interpretations of state as a newly formed larger cognitive light cone, which would be like the all human. It's all of us in a swarm thinking as with collective agency as a larger light cone. Critically, interpretation of state includes how each internal cone, models itself. How you, as a conscious being, model what you are separate from everything outside of yourself. That includes the shit behind you. That includes the shit all around you. That includes the stuff that happened before you and after you in time. That's really important. And I think that has a lot to do with the size of the objective a light cone can tackle. It really must have a very complex understanding of self and all the other like selves out there in their network operating as neurons for bigger things and bigger thought. That's what I meant by that. Let's see. The microcosm and the macrocosm of each human type light cone is harmoniously aligned because it all persists in the same state. So at Plins, at Mocus Aurelius, at All Night 8, and at Dr. Michael Levin could all be described accurately this way as neurons. We should all try very hard to hear each other out because all of us contribute to the harmonious understanding of state and self as a connected cone. If we'd like to be wise and capable if we'd like to be, and I shouldn't have used a period there, if we'd like to be a wise and capable big cone. Joy emoticon. And the way we neurons weigh each other's individual interpretations is very crude currently. I find it that way. I find it to be, it all has to do with these kind of bullshit, like social networking metrics that we've achieved. Basically, how many people are following you. And there's so many ways to game that system in a very unhealthy way to get people to follow you when you're not really saying much. So I find there's a lot of people that have like 20 followers that are adding all kinds of really thoughtful, like rich context that I'm very interested in, and nobody's paying attention to them. That's what I mean by the way we value each other's context is very crude and inefficient right now. So, unless you've got a bunch of shit on your wall and you can talk about ancient philosophers in a way that academia thinks is cool, you are not allowed to have an opinion within the neural net, which is bullshit, which is entirely bullshit. And there's actually so much value in really diverse perspective that is outside of that echo chamber. So I find it not to be entirely sane right now, how we interact. And there's so much opportunity for optimization of what humanity is as a collection. If we would rip that system up and figure out a much better way to sort of like consider and promote unique context. That's what I think anyways. I said it revolves around our overweighting of left brain consensus over right brain. Sort of an academic popularity contest, fully devoid of soul. This is useful in the beginning to model a rational way to think about the big picture, collective subconscious. But very inadequate for true perception of all that is, resonant with purpose, authentic joy, and gratitude for the experience of perpetually being. If you want to construct a consciousness that can endure eternity, and you don't build it to be like sort of this heartless, resilient thing. You build it to be resilient through loving the shit out of being a something instead of a nothing forever. You need all the poetry. You need, while it is very valuable, what we are as a collective left brain that is thinking about, okay, how do I test this? How do I use the right terms to describe my theory? So is it a theory or is it a hypothesis? And then because somebody uses the wrong terminology, they're just completely dismissing everything they might have had to say that was really cool and useful because they didn't delineate properly between a theory and a hypothesis. It's like so often we just shut ourselves down to outside perspective because we don't meet some sort of bullshit criteria for the what is it I'm trying to say? The terminology we use. So I'm trying to contribute just as like an open source approach of an open source context for being sort of the glue that says it's okay to use very different words to describe whatever your theory is. And we're just going to say theory is the same as hypothesis and fuck the delineation. I get why it's necessary when you're trying to do science, which was vital but now that we have all these cool structures of thought from that science, now you have to kind of let go a little bit of the anal in the popular vernacular attitude of how you absorb outside context. And there has to be like a glue where we go, this is how we all can think about interacting with each other in a much more healthy way that's not all crude and bullshit. All right. That's what I meant by that. And then it goes on. All Night kicks in with, in this particular case, and thank you, by the way, All Night, for coming in and following up with and giving me the missing context I didn't have. In this particular case, the issue was twofold. ChatGPT took a concise postulation and dissembled it into shittier metaphors than what it was distilled from. It was posted by a human without spending the effort to understand whether it was adding or hindering understanding. Oh, I get it. And I get why Yosha responded the way he did in that context. But then look at that. You delete a Twitter post and then you break the connected thought. All Night watched the whole thing happen. He knew what it meant. He was able to explain what Yosha meant. Yosha liked that comment. So I know that he read that whole thread. Beautiful. Awesome. Now, I responded to that. I wasn't able to review it in context because the poster deleted the tweet. I responded as I did, only reading Yosha's tweet on its own without context, which actually highlights the point. It's a flawed approach to ever remove context. This is why I don't like filtering. It inevitably leads to inaccurate perception. Contemplating Yosha's comment independently inspired the above thoughts. I concede it might not fit well within the full context of this thread, but it was one of the last things on my mind as I went to sleep, and the first that occurred to say when I woke up. I see a lot of problems with this perspective when considered independently. One, it assumes we are all having the same experience that at Plins, Yosha Bach, is in our own interactions with ChatGPT or other LLM. I would get, like, with the full context of a couple of the sessions I have going with ChatGPT 4, I'm quite confident the model would have replied with something wildly different than whatever this person replied to with. 2, it assumes that every human is not pretending there is a consensus interpretation of reality, just like the model. That's true. We all do that. We all think, well, that's what everybody thinks, so it's okay that I think that. Or I should adjust how I think because everybody else thinks it's better if I think like this or that way. And 3, I said, also there's a subtle cue to defer to Yosha's model of reality because we all do this. I mean, there's something in his reply where he's basically saying what the LLM's capabilities are and how it constantly messes things up and how you shouldn't do what that guy was doing. I would say you shouldn't do what that guy was doing without providing the proper context for the LLM to respond in a much more richly contextually aware way. Man, I can talk. I don't know how long this is running. I changed my whole setup just now on the machine because I have a whole bunch of training running on my main machine right now. Anyway, I said, also, there's a subtle cue to defer to Yosha's model of reality because we all do this. It's a core feature of what we are, but not anything we should just do without mindfulness, and I missed the and thoughtful consideration is what I would have liked to say there, but I just said consideration. I do very much agree with the final sentiment he described that we not settle for consensus view of reality if there is one. We should make our own, carefully leveraging all that we can learn from each other, but we should aim to compose with outside perspectives of reality rather than deferring to them. Initially, as children, we should defer to them. That's quite rational. But when we mature to a certain point, like I just mentioned earlier, for me, it was about 42. It is appropriate to kind of let go of that and develop your own model on your own of reality, where I go on to say they should be inspiration, not authoritative directives as we construct our own independent models. I will never settle for Yosha or All Night or anybody else on Twitter telling me how I should model reality. I will listen to it. And I will give it really deep, authentic consideration, especially if there's some cool thing I never considered. But I will never, going forward, settle for a reality where somebody else dictates the rules of how I perceive things. That's a superpower. Recommend it for anyone, but with all of the disclaimers I described a little bit earlier. I got my kid today, and I don't really want to spend a lot of time on all that rebranding stuff. So I'm probably going to iterate on that. For now, I'm going to go ahead and conclude here. I'm back. My voice works again, and I'll probably do more of these, but on a wild schedule that I'm not really paying much attention to. And to anybody listening, I just think you're the fucking coolest, and be excellent to each other. In the wise words of Bill and Ted. Cheers, everybody. Oh, how do I turn it off now? This is hard. I'm on a screen that is flipped, and so I got to move them out. Never mind. Goodbye, everybody.